Beneath the shimmering surface of the Everblue Sea, where sunlight danced in liquid gold ribbons and coral castles spiraled toward the surface, there existed a kingdom more magical than any sailor's tale. Here, the currents sang lullabies as they wove through forests of kelp, and the ocean floor glittered with seashells that held whispers of ancient dreams. It was in this watery paradise that a young seahorse named Lumi spent her days darting between anemones, her scales shifting between shades of dawn pink and twilight blue with every joyful movement. On the night of the sapphire tide, when the moon's reflection turned the waves into a mirror of stars, all the creatures of Everblue gathered near the great pearl oyster. Its shell, taller than 3 dolphins stacked nose to tail, glowed with an inner light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Lumi fluttered her tiny fins excitedly as she joined her friends, Bubbles, a pufferfish who could blow rings that held tiny rainbows. Finley, a shy clownfish who hid in the swaying arms of pink coral when startled, and old Captain Tiberius, a sea turtle whose barnacle-encrusted shell told stories of centuries past. The pearl oyster slowly opened, revealing not a gem, but a swirling pool of liquid starlight. From its depths emerged Queen Seraphina, a manta ray whose wings stretched like living velvet, dotted with bioluminescent patterns that changed with her moods. Tonight, she murmured, her voice vibrating through the water like a harp's lowest note. We weave the Tidesong, the magic that keeps our home safe and sparkling. With a graceful sweep of her wing, she released a shower of glowing plankton that formed into shapes above them, whales made of constellations, jellyfish that carried tiny thunderstorms in their bells, and seahorses riding currents of liquid moonlight. Lumi gasped as a strand of the Tidesong wrapped around her, showing her a vision of herself leading a procession of seahorses through an underwater canyon where the rocks sang in harmonies only the ocean could remember. But the celebration shattered when a shadow darker than the deepest trench swept through the gathering. It was Kraken, a once gentle octopus whose heart had hardened after being caught in a fisherman's net long ago. His tentacles, now tipped with bitter ink, smeared across the Tidesong, turning vibrant visions into murky fog. "Why should you have light," he rumbled, "when I was left in the dark?" The sea creatures trembled as their beautiful dreams dissolved, until Lumi, her tiny body glowing bravely, darted forward. "Kraken," she called, her voice softer than a seahorse's whisper, but steady as the tide. "Your net may have scarred you, but your heart still knows the way home." To everyone's astonishment, a single tear slipped from Kraken's eye, becoming a perfect pearl as it fell. Queen Seraphina caught it in her wing, and as she placed it back into the oyster, the Tidesong swelled brighter than ever, this time showing Kraken wrapped in the loving arms of a giant squid family, his tentacles weaving beautiful patterns in harmony with theirs. As dawn approached, the creatures nestled into beds of sponges softer than clouds, rocked by the gentle pulse of the ocean. Kraken curled his tentacles around the pearl oyster protectively, his ink now shimmering like crushed sapphires. And Lumi, drifting to sleep in a hammock woven from seagrass, smiled as the Tidesong hummed through her dreams, a promise that even the loneliest heart could find its way back to the light, if only it dared to follow the current. As the first golden rays of morning sunlight pierced the water's surface, something miraculous happened in Everblue. The coral reefs began to bloom with flowers never before seen under the sea. Delicate spirals of living crystal that chimed like glass wind chimes when the current touched them. Lumi awoke to find her tiny fins had transformed overnight. They now glowed with soft blue bioluminescence, leaving shimmering trails like comet tails as she swam. The great pearl oyster had changed too. Its shell now stood open permanently, revealing a swirling vortex of colors that pulsed in time with the ocean's heartbeat. Tiny fish darted in and out of the light, their scales taking on temporary rainbow hues as they passed through the glow. Queen Seraphina hovered nearby, her wing pattern shifting constantly like a living kaleidoscope. "The Tidesong has blessed us with new magic," she announced, her voice carrying through the water like a warm embrace. Down in the kelp forests, Finley the clownfish discovered he could now make the seaweed glow simply by brushing against it. His usual shyness melted away as he darted excitedly through the strands, painting temporary constellations that lingered for minutes before fading. Even old Captain Tiberius found his ancient shell had renewed. The barnacles had fallen away to reveal intricate carvings of underwater cities from times long forgotten, and his movements became surprisingly spry for a turtle of his years. But the most astonishing change was Kraken. The once bitter octopus now radiated a soft purple light from his suckers, and wherever he swam, the water itself seemed to sparkle. He had taken up residence near the pearl oyster, using his tentacles to carefully polish its surface while humming a deep, soothing melody that attracted schools of fish who danced around him in spirals. At midday, when the sun stood directly overhead, the entire seafloor began to tremble gently. From the sand rose structures no sea creature had ever seen. Towers of living glass that curved into graceful arches, forming something between a palace and a playground. The walls pulsed with inner light, and the doorways shaped themselves to fit whatever creature approached. Lumi was the first to enter, gasping as the interior shifted to create perfect seahorse-sized tunnels that looped and spiraled in impossible ways. As evening fell, the ocean prepared for another sapphire tide, but this time every creature knew the magic wouldn't fade with the morning. The Tidesong had become part of them, just as they had become part of its eternal melody. Lumi curled up in a cradle of glowing coral beside Kraken, watching as the first stars appeared through the water's surface. Their reflections joined with the bioluminescent lights below, until it became impossible to tell where the ocean ended and the sky began, one perfect, endless dream of blue. As the days passed in Everblue, the magic of the Tidesong continued to unfold in ever more wondrous ways. The crystal flowers that had bloomed on the coral reefs began producing tiny bubbles that, when caught in a fish's mouth, filled them with the most delicious flavors imaginable. Some tasted like sunshine on waves, others like the memory of a perfect summer day. Bubbles the pufferfish became quite the celebrity, hosting tasting parties where he'd blow elaborate bubble sculptures for his friends to sample. The living glass palace grew more intricate with each passing tide. Staircases of solidified water appeared, allowing creatures to swim up through impossible spirals that defied normal ocean currents. Rooms formed based on whoever entered them, for Finley, a cozy nook lined with glowing anemones that pulsed in time with his heartbeat, for old Captain Tiberius, an entire hall displaying moving images of ancient shipwrecks and forgotten underwater civilizations. One morning, Lumi discovered something extraordinary while exploring a newly formed wing of the palace. She found a chamber filled with what looked like liquid mirrors, each one showing glimpses of other oceans across the world. One mirror revealed a tropical reef where parrotfish sang opera, another showed a deep trench where lanternfish held elaborate light-based ceremonies. But most astonishing was the central mirror. It reflected not another place, but another time. Lumi gasped as she saw young Queen Seraphina, centuries ago, first discovering the pearl oyster with her original pot of mantas. As Lumi reached out to touch the surface, the mirror rippled and she found herself not just observing, but actually transported into the memory. She could feel the ocean currents of that long-ago time, smell the different composition of the water. Young Seraphina turned her massive head and seemed to look directly at Lumi, her eyes twinkling with knowing amusement before the vision faded and Lumi was back in the present-day palace. News of this discovery spread quickly through Everblue. Kraken, in particular, became fascinated with the time mirrors. The once lonely octopus spent hours gently running his tentacles over their surfaces, watching scenes from his own past, his childhood in a bustling octopus garden, his rescue from the fishing net by a now ancient dolphin, and most poignantly, the moment he first chose isolation over connection. Tears of liquid pearl formed in his eyes as he watched these memories, each one sinking to the chamber floor where they took root and grew into tiny oyster sprouts. Meanwhile, the effects of the Tidesong began spreading beyond Everblue's borders. Turtles migrating through the area found their shells temporarily glowing with intricate patterns. A pod of passing humpback whales discovered their songs now created visible shapes in the water, spirals and loops that hung suspended for hours after they'd passed. Even the ocean itself seemed changed. Storms that would have ravaged the coastline now gently parted around the magical waters, leaving Everblue perpetually calm while still allowing the natural cycle of waves and tides. One moonless night, when the bioluminescent life in Everblue shone brightest, Queen Seraphina gathered all the creatures for a special ceremony. The pearl oyster had produced its first new pearl since the Tidesong's transformation, a perfect sphere that contained swirling images of every creature's happiest memory. This, Seraphina announced, is the heart of Everblue. Whoever holds it will be able to share their joy directly with others, heart to heart. To everyone's surprise, she presented the pearl not to Lumi or one of the other main caretakers, but to a tiny cleaner shrimp named Peppo, who had been quietly tending to all the creatures' needs without fanfare. Peppo's tiny claws trembled as he accepted the gift, but when he held it aloft, a wave of pure, golden warmth radiated through the water. Every creature suddenly understood how deeply connected they all were, how Finley's shyness mirrored Kraken's loneliness, how Bubble's showmanship covered his fear of being ordinary, how even Queen Seraphina sometimes doubted her wisdom. In that moment of profound connection, the entire ocean seemed to hold its breath. Then, from the deepest trenches to the shallowest tide pools, every living creature felt a gentle pulse, the heartbeat of the sea itself. The fish schools moved in perfect unison, the corals bloomed simultaneously, and even the great whales paused their journeys to listen. As dawn broke, the creatures of Everblue realized their home had grown once more. The living glass palace now had towers that pierced the water's surface, creating a bridge between sea and sky. Seabirds landed cautiously on these spires, finding they could breathe underwater while perched there. Dolphins from distant pods came to investigate, their clicks and whistles translating perfectly through the magic of the Tidesong. And Lumi? The little seahorse who had first welcomed the changed Kraken now found herself growing in unexpected ways. Her body remained small, but her heart expanded with each passing day. She took to swimming the borders of Everblue, welcoming newcomers, and helping them find their place in the ever-growing tapestry of their magical community. Sometimes, when the moon was full, longtime residents would swear they saw two tiny seahorses swimming where there should only be one, as if the magic had given Lumi a shadow made of pure starlight, a companion for all her adventures yet to come. For in Everblue, where the Tidesong now lived in every drop of water and every creature's heart, the most important magic wasn't the glowing corals or the time mirrors or even the living palace. It was the understanding that had blossomed between them all, that every creature, no matter how small or how scarred, had a unique note to sing in the ocean's eternal melody. And as long as they remembered to listen to each other, the music would never fade. As the magic of Everblue deepened, the ocean began to whisper of something stirring in the darkest trenches, a place where even the Tidesong's light had never reached. It was said that the abyssal choir, a congregation of creatures long forgotten by the sunlit world, had begun to hum a note so low it made the water tremble. Lumi felt it first. While playing in the palace's time mirror chamber, she noticed a new reflection forming, one that showed only darkness. When she pressed her fin to the glass, the cold of the deep rushed through her, and for the first time, she heard it, a melody of loneliness so profound it made her glow flicker like a candle in the wind. Queen Seraphina gathered the council of Everblue, Kraken with his luminous suckers, old Captain Tiberius with his carved shell of histories, Bubbles and his flavor-filled bubbles, and little Peppo, still cradling the heart of Everblue. "The abyssal choir is not our enemy," the queen murmured. "They are the ocean's oldest dreamers. But their song is out of tune, and if it unravels further, it could fracture the Tidesong itself." A hush fell over them. Then, to everyone's surprise, Finley the clownfish darted forward. "I'll go," he stammered, his usual shyness replaced by quiet resolve. "I'm small. Maybe they won't see me as a threat." Kraken uncoiled a tentacle. "You won't go alone." And so, the most unlikely of delegations set out, Finley, Kraken, and Lumi, carrying a single bubble from bubbles that glowed with condensed Tidesong. As they descended, the water grew heavier, the light dimmer. Strange fish with lanterns on their faces watched them pass, and the bones of ancient shipwrecks stood like ghostly sentinels in the dark. Finally, they reached the edge of the abyss, a cliff that dropped into nothingness. From below, the choir's song rose, a mournful drone that made Lumi's glow dim. Then, shapes emerged, a colossal whale skeleton, its ribs forming a cathedral of bone, and within it, creatures of the deep, viperfish with voices like cracking ice, anglerfish whose lures pulsed in discordant rhythms, and a being at the center that stole their breath away, the Leviathan of Echoes. Half jellyfish, half eel, its translucent body shimmered with trapped memories, every ship's bell that had sunk, every whale's final note, every sailor's last prayer. It had been singing so long, it had forgotten how to stop. Kraken did something then that no one expected. He sang back, not with words, but with a vibration from his very core, the same frequency that had once made him bitter. The Leviathan stirred, its massive form shifting as if waking from a centuries-long dream. Lumi, heart-pounding, swam forward and placed Bubbles' glowing gift into the water. The Tidesong bubble floated to the Leviathan and popped. For the first time in millennia, light touched the abyss. The choir gasped as one. The Leviathan's body began to clear, the trapped memories rising like bubbles to the surface. And then, the singing changed. The mournful drone wove with Kraken's strength, Finley's quiet courage, and Lumi's hope, becoming something new. The very walls of the trench began to glow, revealing caves of crystalline coral no surface dweller had ever seen. When they returned to Everblue, the ocean itself seemed different. The Tidesong now had a deeper, richer tone, as if the abyss had been its missing refrain all along. New mirrors formed in the palace, these ones showing not the past, but possibilities. A future where surface children and sea creatures laughed together, where forgotten trenches bloomed with gardens, where no part of the ocean, no matter how dark, was ever left unheard. And in the quietest hours, if you listened closely, you could hear it, the abyssal choir's new song, weaving with Everblue's magic, reminding them all. The deepest darkness only exists to make the light sing louder. As the harmony between Everblue and the abyss deepened, an unexpected ripple began at the ocean's surface. Humans had noticed. Fishermen whispered of the glowing sea, where their nets came up empty, yet left them feeling strangely hopeful. Scientists recorded impossible sonar readings, structures that appeared and disappeared like breath on glass. And one small, curious girl named Mara, who visited the shore every evening, swore she heard singing beneath the waves. Lumi discovered the first surface connection when a seashell on the palace altar began projecting unfamiliar images. A little human drawing pictures of fish in the sand, dropping flower petals into the tide. The shell's visions grew clearer each day, until the creatures of Everblue could practically smell the land's strange, dry sweetness. "This is dangerous," rumbled old Captain Tiberius, his shell-carved memories showing too many stories of human harm. But Peppo, still holding the heart of Everblue, pulsed warm against his chest. Or, he piped up in his tiny shrimp voice, "Maybe it's the next note in our song?" The debate stilled when Queen Seraphina's wings suddenly blazed with new patterns, a perfect mirror of the night sky above. "The Tidesong is reacting," she murmured. "Something up there is singing back to us." That night, under a moon so full it seemed to drip silver, Mara waded knee-deep into the waves, holding a conch shell to her lips. The note she blew was clumsy, aching with longing. But deep below, the pearl oyster shuddered open wider than ever before, releasing a cascade of glowing pearls that raced upward like reverse rain. Lumi darted after them without thinking. As she breached the surface, her world exploded with terrifying brilliance. The shocking cold of air, the overwhelming scent of pine and salt, and most astonishing of all, Mara's wide-eyed gasp as their gazes locked. For a heartbeat, time suspended. The little girl's hands trembled as she reached out. Lumi, heart pounding, did something no seahorse had ever done. She leaped, her bioluminescent trail painting an arc through the night as she landed gently in Mara's cupped palms. The connection ignited like coral spawning. Mara's laughter sent vibrations through the water that traveled all the way to the abyss, where the Leviathan of Echoes shimmered with newfound curiosity. In Everblue's palace, a new wing erupted, this one with ceilings open to the sky, filled with floating orbs that showed human memories alongside sea creatures. But the true miracle came at dawn. As Mara reluctantly returned Lumi to the waves, the seahorse's glow transferred to the girl's fingertips. Mara inhaled sharply as visions flooded her. Whale songs translated to poetry, the taste of sunlight filtered through kelp, the crushing beauty of the Leviathan's grief. When she stumbled home, she found saltwater pearls pooling in her palms whenever she hummed. Word spread on both sides of the surface. Fishermen left offerings of woven kelp baskets instead of nets. Children built sand replicas of the living glass palace. And deep below, the creatures of Everblue prepared their greatest celebration yet, the first Tide Callers Festival, where one chosen human would walk among them, and the ocean would teach its oldest stories to the land. As the pearl oyster began producing pearls that held not just memories, but understanding, Queen Seraphina wrapped her wings around Lumi. "Little bridge," she whispered, "what have you started?" Lumi watched a pearl rise toward the distant, shimmering surface where Mara waited. Something that should have begun long ago. The morning of the first Tide Colors festival dawned with the ocean holding its breath. A path of glowing seagrass had risen to the surface, its strands woven with bioluminescent pearls that pulsed in time with Mara's heartbeat as she stood trembling on the shore. Behind her, the entire village had gathered, fishermen clutching charms carved from driftwood, children holding their breath, elders remembering old stories they'd thought were just myths. Lumi breached the surface in a shower of liquid diamonds, her tiny seahorse form now adorned with delicate silver markings that shimmered like a constellation. "Step onto the light," she whispered, the first words any human had ever heard from the sea. Mara's bare foot touched the glowing path and the ocean parted. Walls of water rose on either side, held aloft by the combined will of Everblue's creatures. Kraken's tentacles formed a protective archway of swirling currents. Schools of fish darted through the liquid walls like living stained glass. And there, at the path's end, stood Queen Seraphina in her full majesty, her wingspan blocking the sun, her body radiating warmth that instantly dried Mara's salt-damp clothes. "Welcome, Tidecaller," the queen murmured, and her voice carried the weight of centuries. The procession began, descending into the heart of the ocean where humans were never meant to go. The wonders came in overwhelming succession. The memory currents, where passing through certain waters let Mara experience moments from sea creatures' lives, the gut-wrenching joy of a humpback whale's first breach, the quiet contentment of a sea turtle's 1,000-mile journey. Even Kraken's painful memories of nets transforming into his newfound belonging. The choral choir, a living orchestra where anemones played harmonies on their own tentacles, urchins provided percussion, and a particularly talented octopus conducted with 3 limbs while simultaneously translating the music into colors that danced across its skin. The banquet of lost flavors, prepared by Peppo and his team of cleaner shrimp, dishes crafted from forgotten ocean memories, the tang of iceberg melt from the Arctic, the electric zing of a lightning storm absorbed by plankton, even the mythical first taste of the ocean's earliest single-celled life. But the festival's climax came at the moon pool, a newly formed basin where surface and depth met without barrier. The Leviathan of Echoes rose from the abyss, its now translucent body pulsing with every story it had ever absorbed. As Mara placed her hands in the water, the ancient being began its gift. A vision of the original Tidesong. Not just Queen Seraphina's magic, but the very first moment the ocean understood it could create rather than simply exist. Mara watched primordial waters swirl with intention for the first time, saw the birth of the pearl oyster from a single drop of starlight that refused to dissolve, witnessed the heartbreaking instant when early humans stopped understanding the waves' language. Tears streamed down Mara's face as the vision faded. You've been waiting for us to remember." The Leviathan's massive eye blinked slowly. "We never forgot you." As dawn approached, Mara knew her time below was ending. But the farewell was not an ending. Queen Seraphina pressed a living pearl into the girl's palm that fused with her skin, becoming a permanent mark. "Now you will always hear us," Lumi explained, nuzzling Mara's wrist where the pearl had settled. "And others will hear through you." When Mara returned to shore, the village erupted, but not with disbelief. To her shock, they remembered her journey, as if the ocean had been whispering it to them all along. The fishermen's nets now glowed faintly when catching only what the sea could spare. Children's sandcastles built themselves into perfect tiny replicas of the living palace. And every shell pressed to an ear told not vague ocean sounds, but distinct voices, laughter, music. Deep below, the pearl oyster produced a new pearl unlike any before, this one containing a human memory. Mara's memory of her mother singing her to sleep with a lullaby that, the ocean now revealed, had originally been a whale's song. Lumi watched the pearl rise to join the others in the palace's new human wing. "This is just the first verse," she whispered. And somewhere in the deep, the Leviathan of Echoes began composing a new song, one that had room for land, sea, and all the creatures who were just beginning to remember they'd never truly been separate. Years flowed like gentle tides, and Mara grew from a curious child into the first true tide caller, a bridge between land and sea. Under her guidance, humans learned to listen again. Fishermen became guardians, their boats trailing songs of gratitude that nourished the ocean as much as the ocean nourished them. Children planted gardens of coral along the shorelines, their laughter as much a part of the Tidesong as the whale's ancient melodies. But the greatest miracle came on the night of the 100th Tidecallers Festival, when the ocean and the sky decided to meet at last. Queen Seraphina, her wings now vast enough to cradle entire currents, rose from the depths with Lumi perched between her horns. The seahorse had grown too, not in size, but in radiance. Her body was now pure, shimmering energy, a living piece of the Tidesong given form. Together, they swam upward, past the surface, into the air itself, where the water refused to let them fall. And Mara, now silver-haired but bright-eyed, walked across the waves to meet them. The moment their foreheads touched human, seahorse, and manta ray, the ocean exhaled a breath it had been holding for millennia. From the darkest trenches to the highest clouds, the world shivered. The Leviathan of Echoes burst from the depths, its body now woven from strands of moonlight and memory. It wrapped around them like a living constellation, singing a single, perfect note that resonated in every living heart. And as it sang, the impossible happened. The pearl oyster, ancient and eternal, bloomed. Its shell opened wider than ever before, revealing not a pearl, but a tiny, glowing world, a perfect miniature of land and sea intertwined, where rivers ran upward into the stars and forests grew beneath the waves. It was the first true dream of Earth as it had always meant to be. The vision expanded, wrapping the entire planet in a net of golden light. For one breathless moment, every human, every creature, every blade of grass and drop of water remembered. They remembered being stardust, remembered being one, remembered that they had never, not for a single instant, been alone. Then the light gently faded, leaving only the quiet lapping of waves against the shore and the certain knowledge that something profound had changed. Lumi, her body now more light than flesh, pressed her nose to Mara's cheek. "This was never just about the ocean," she whispered. "It was about all of us waking up." And as the first birds of dawn began to sing, their voices now carrying the same magic as the Tidesong, the world began its first morning in a new age. An age where every child would know, deep in their bones, that when they sang to the sea would always sing back. The end.